Eric had always loved hiking, but the Black Hollow Forest was different. It was deeper, darker, and far older than any forest he had explored before. The locals in the nearby town had warned him not to go too far into the woods. They said the deeper trails were wrong, but Eric laughed it off. People always made up stories about forests. Late in the afternoon, Eric parked his truck near an old dirt road and started hiking with his backpack and camera. His plan was simple: hike for a few hours, film the scenery for his channel, and return before nightfall. At first, the trail was normal. Tall pine trees stretched high above him, and the air smelled of wet leaves and moss. Birds chirped somewhere in the distance, and the wind whispered softly through the branches. But after about an hour of walking, Eric noticed something strange. The trail he was following wasn't on his GPS map anymore. He stopped and pulled out his phone, zooming in on the map again and again. Nothing. The path beneath his feet simply didn't exist on the screen. "That's weird," Eric muttered. Still, the trail looked well used. The dirt was pressed down like people had walked there many times before. So he kept going. As the sun slowly sank lower in the sky, the forest grew quieter. Too quiet. The birds stopped singing. Even the wind seemed to disappear. Eric suddenly heard a sound behind him. Crunch. He spun around. Nothing. Just rows of dark trees stretching endlessly behind him. He laughed nervously. Probably a deer, he said to himself. But when he turned back toward the trail, he froze. There were footprints in the dirt ahead of him. Fresh footprints. But they weren't there a few seconds ago. And the worst part? They were walking toward him. Eric stared at the footprints, his heart beating faster. They were large, deeper than normal human footprints, like whoever made them was extremely heavy. He slowly stepped closer. The footprints continued down the trail, but something about them felt wrong. They were barefoot. No shoes. No socks. Just bare feet pressed into the dirt. Eric looked around the forest again. "Hello," he called out. His voice echoed weakly through the trees. No answer. The forest remained silent. Then another sound came from deeper in the woods. Crunch, crunch, like something slowly walking through leaves. Eric grabbed the small flashlight from his backpack, even though there was still some daylight left. "Okay, someone's messing with me," he muttered. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. Nobody else should be this far out here. The footprints suddenly stopped, right in the middle of the trail. Eric knelt down to examine them more closely. They ended abruptly, as if the person had simply vanished. A cold chill ran down his spine. Then he heard breathing, right behind him. Slow, heavy. Eric spun around so fast he nearly fell. Nothing. No one. Just trees. But the smell hit him immediately. A horrible, rotting smell like something dead. His flashlight flickered slightly. Then he noticed something carved into a nearby tree. 3 long scratches. Fresh. As if something with claws had just dragged them across the bark. Eric suddenly felt the overwhelming urge to leave. Right now, he turned around to head back the way he came. But the trail behind him was gone. Completely gone. Where the path should have been, there was now only thick forest. Eric's stomach dropped. He whispered quietly to himself. "That's not possible." Eric's breathing became faster as panic slowly took over. The trail had vanished. Completely. He spun around again and again, trying to find the direction he had come from. But every side of the forest looked exactly the same. Tall trees, dark shadows, endless silence. Then something moved high above him. Eric slowly lifted his flashlight toward the branches. At first, he saw nothing, just leaves. Then 2 pale shapes appeared between the branches. Hands. Long, thin hands gripping the tree limb. Eric froze. His flashlight beam moved slightly higher. And that's when he saw the face. It wasn't human. The skin was stretched too tight across its skull. Its eyes were huge and black, reflecting the flashlight like an animal's. But the smile was the worst part. Its mouth was impossibly wide, full of jagged teeth. The creature tilted its head slowly, studying Eric. Then it began climbing down the tree. Not like a normal person. It moved like a spider. Fast. Too fast. Eric turned and ran. Branches slapped against his face as he sprinted through the forest blindly. Behind him, he could hear it crashing through the trees. Closer. Closer. Its footsteps were heavy, shaking the ground. Eric tripped over a fallen log and slammed into the dirt. He scrambled to his feet and looked back. The creature stood about 20 feet away. Tall, unnaturally tall. Its arms nearly touched the ground, and it was still smiling. Then it spoke, not words, but a horrible imitation of Eric's own voice. "Hello?" Eric's blood turned cold when he heard his own voice echo from the creature's mouth. "Hello?" It stepped closer. Its long arms swayed slowly as it walked. Eric backed away, shaking. "What do you want?" he whispered. The creature's smile widened. Then it spoke again, this time copying Eric's earlier words perfectly. "Probably a deer." Eric felt like the air had been sucked from his lungs. It had been watching him the whole time. Suddenly, the forest erupted with sounds. Branches snapping, leaves crunching, more footsteps. Not just one creature. Many. Shapes began moving between the trees. Tall, thin silhouettes creeping closer from every direction. Eric realized the horrifying truth. He hadn't wandered into their forest. They had led him here. The first creature tilted its head again. Then it opened its mouth wider than humanly possible. A horrible screech exploded from its throat. The other creatures answered with the same sound. Eric ran. He ran harder than he ever had in his life. But no matter how far he went, the forest never ended. Hours passed. The trees never changed. And the sounds of those creatures never stopped following him. Days later, Eric's truck was found parked near the dirt road. His backpack and camera were still inside. But Eric was gone, completely vanished. Sometimes hikers in Black Hollow Forest say they hear something deep in the woods, a voice calling for help. But if you listen carefully, the voice doesn't sound human anymore. Daniel wasn't supposed to be this deep in the woods. His original hiking trail ended miles back, but curiosity had pushed him further. The deeper he went, the older the forest felt. The trees grew taller, thicker, blocking most of the sunlight. Even the air felt heavier here. Daniel checked his phone again. No signal. "Great," he muttered. He continued walking, stepping carefully over fallen branches and thick roots twisting across the ground like snakes. The forest was unnaturally quiet. No birds, no insects, just silence. After another 20 minutes of hiking, Daniel saw something through the trees. A cabin. It sat alone in a small clearing, surrounded by tall pines. The wood was dark and weathered, like it had been standing there for decades. Daniel frowned. "This isn't on the map," he said quietly. He slowly approached the cabin. The windows were dusty and cracked, and the front door hung slightly open. It looked abandoned. "Hello," Daniel called. No answer. He stepped onto the porch. The wood creaked loudly beneath his boots. Every sound seemed too loud in the silent forest. Daniel pushed the door open. The inside smelled like old wood and damp earth. There was a small table, a broken chair, and a stone fireplace filled with cold ashes. Dust covered everything. No one had been here in years. Or so it seemed. Then Daniel noticed something strange on the table. A notebook. It looked newer than everything else in the cabin. Daniel picked it up and opened the first page. Written in messy handwriting were the words, "Do not stay here after dark." Daniel laughed nervously. Very funny. But when he flipped to the next page, his smile faded. The same sentence was written again and again, page after page. "Do not stay here after dark." Then he heard a loud crack from somewhere outside the cabin, like a heavy branch snapping. Daniel slowly turned toward the door. The sun was already starting to set. Daniel stepped outside the cabin and looked around the clearing. The forest had changed. It felt darker now, even though the sun hadn't fully set yet. Long shadows stretched across the ground between the trees. Probably just an animal, Daniel whispered to himself. But the silence felt wrong. The forest should have been full of sounds at this time of day. Instead, it felt like everything was holding its breath. Daniel looked back at the cabin. He could hike back to the trail, but it would take hours. By the time he reached his car, it would already be night. The thought of hiking through unfamiliar woods in complete darkness made his stomach twist. "Just one night," he said quietly. He went back inside the cabin. As the sky outside slowly turned darker, Daniel built a small fire in the fireplace using dry wood stacked in the corner. The The firelight flickered across the dusty walls. For a while, everything seemed normal. Then the knocking started. Knock, knock, knock. Daniel froze. The sound came from the cabin door. Slow, deliberate. He stared at it. Hello, he called. Silence. Then the knocking came again. Knock, knock, knock. Daniel stood up slowly and walked toward the door. His heart pounded as he reached for the handle. He pulled the door open. No one was there. Just darkness and tall trees swaying gently in the night wind. Daniel stepped onto the porch and looked around. Very funny, he said loudly. No answer. Then he looked down. There were footprints in the dirt leading to the porch. Huge footprints, much larger than a human's. And they stopped right at the door. But there were no footprints leading away. Daniel slammed the door shut and locked it. His hands were shaking. That's not possible, he whispered. He paced across the cabin, trying to calm himself down. Maybe the footprints had been there earlier. Maybe he just hadn't noticed them. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. The knocking came again, this time from the window. Tap, tap, tap. Daniel slowly turned toward the sound. The window was covered in dirt and dust, making it hard to see outside. Another tap. Something was definitely there. Daniel grabbed a piece of firewood from the fireplace and walked closer. His breathing grew heavier with each step. He leaned closer to the window and wiped some of the dirt away with his sleeve. At first he saw nothing. Then two huge eyes opened in the darkness outside. Daniel jumped back. The eyes were too high off the ground, at least 8 feet tall. The creature slowly moved closer to the window. Its face pressed against the glass. The skin looked gray and stretched tight across its bones. Its mouth opened slightly, revealing long, sharp teeth. But the worst part was its expression. It looked curious, like it was studying him. The creature raised one long finger and slowly scratched the glass. Screech. The sound echoed through the cabin. Daniel backed away toward the fireplace. The creature's head tilted slightly. Then it smiled. And behind it, more shapes began moving between the trees. Daniel stared at the window in horror. More eyes appeared in the darkness outside. Dozens of them. Tall shapes slowly surrounded the cabin, stepping silently between the trees. They were all the same. Thin, unnaturally tall, with long arms that almost touched the ground. Daniel realized something terrifying. The creatures weren't trying to break in. They were waiting, like predators surrounding prey. The one at the window slowly lifted its hand and pointed toward the cabin door. Then it knocked again. Knock, knock, knock. Daniel's mind raced. Why would they knock? Why not just break inside? Then he remembered the notebook. He ran to the table and flipped through the pages again. Every page repeated the same warning. Do not stay here after dark. But near the back of the notebook, one final sentence was written. The cabin keeps them out, unless you open the door. Daniel's blood ran cold. The knocking came again, but this time it wasn't just one creature. Knocking started from every wall of the cabin. Doors, windows, walls. Knock, knock, knock. The creatures were surrounding him completely. Then a voice came from outside. A human voice. Help me, please. Daniel froze. It sounded like a woman crying. Please open the door. But the voice sounded wrong, like someone trying to copy how humans speak. Daniel slowly backed away from the door. The knocking continued for hours, but Daniel never opened it. The next morning, when sunlight finally reached the clearing, the forest was silent again. The creatures were gone, but the notebook had a new sentence written on the last page. You survived the first night. Mark and his younger brother Tyler had been planning their camping trip for weeks. They wanted to explore the deepest part of Pine Ridge Forest, a place known for its massive trees and endless hiking trails. When they reached the small ranger station near the entrance of the forest, an old park ranger stepped outside to greet them. You boys planning to camp tonight? The ranger asked. Yeah, Mark replied. We're heading about 10 miles in. The ranger's expression changed slightly. Stay on the marked trails, he said firmly. Tyler laughed. Relax, we're not amateurs. The ranger didn't smile. There's an area in the forest where the trails disappear. If you see old wooden signs with red paint on them, turn around immediately. Mark raised an eyebrow. Why? The ranger looked past them toward the trees. Because people who ignore those signs sometimes don't come back. Tyler rolled his eyes once they walked away. Classic creepy forest story, he said. They hiked for hours, enjoying the quiet beauty of the woods. Sunlight filtered through the tall trees, and the air smelled fresh and cool. Eventually, they found a perfect clearing near a small stream and set up their tent. As the evening sky turned orange, Tyler wandered a little farther into the woods to collect firewood. That's when he saw it. An old wooden sign nailed to a tree. The wood was cracked and covered in moss. But the red paint on the sign was still visible. 3 words were written on it. "Do not go further." Tyler smiled. "Guess we found the spooky part of the forest." Tyler carried the firewood back to the campsite. "You're not going to believe what I found," he said. Mark looked up from the small campfire he was starting. "What?" Tyler dropped the wood beside him. "One of those warning signs the ranger talked about." Mark laughed. "And you ignored it?" "Of course," Tyler said. "There's nothing out there." But as night slowly settled over Pine Ridge Forest, the atmosphere began to change. The sounds of birds faded. The wind stopped moving through the trees. Even the small stream nearby seemed quieter. Mark noticed it first. "Does the forest seem too quiet to you?" Tyler shrugged. "Probably just nighttime." They sat by the fire for a while, talking and laughing. The flames crackled softly, lighting the small clearing. Then Tyler heard something. A distant knock. Knock, knock, knock. It echoed faintly through the trees. Mark frowned. "Did you hear that?" Tyler nodded slowly. "Yeah." Another knock came from deeper in the forest. Knock, knock, knock. It sounded like wood hitting wood. "Maybe another camper?" Tyler suggested. But the knocks didn't stop. They continued at the same slow rhythm. Knock, knock, knock. And each time the sound seemed closer. Mark stood up and grabbed his flashlight. "I'm going to check it out." Tyler hesitated. "Maybe we shouldn't." But Mark was already walking toward the dark trees. The knocking stopped the moment he stepped into the woods. The silence that followed felt even worse. Mark walked slowly between the trees, shining his flashlight in every direction. "Hello," he called. No response. Behind him, Tyler stood at the edge of the clearing. "Mark, maybe we should go back," Tyler said nervously. The forest felt colder now. Mark moved deeper between the trees until he found something strange. Another wooden sign, but this one had been broken in half. The red paint still showed the words. "Do not go." The rest of the sign was missing. Then Mark heard a voice behind him. "Hello." He turned around quickly. Tyler was standing several feet away. "What?" Mark asked. Tyler looked confused. "I didn't say anything." Mark frowned. "But I just heard you." Tyler shook his head slowly. "I was standing here the whole time." Then the voice came again, from somewhere deeper in the forest. "Hello?" It sounded exactly like Mark. Both brothers froze. "That was your voice," Tyler whispered. Mark felt his stomach drop. The voice came again, this time closer. "Hello?" Branches began moving between the trees ahead. Something tall stepped out of the darkness. At first it looked like a person, but as it stepped into the flashlight beam, they realized it wasn't. Its limbs were far too long. Its body bent at unnatural angles, and its face looked like a twisted copy of Mark's. The creature stood silently between the trees. Its head tilted slowly as it stared at Mark and Tyler. Then it smiled. The smile stretched wider than any human mouth could. Tyler grabbed Mark's arm. "We need to run." The creature suddenly spoke again. "Run." It perfectly copied Tyler's voice. Mark and Tyler turned and sprinted back toward their campsite. Behind them, branches snapped loudly as the creature followed. But something worse happened. More voices echoed through the forest. Their voices. "Run! Hurry! Don't stop!" The woods were repeating everything they said. When they burst back into the clearing, Mark grabbed the car keys from his backpack. They ran down the trail as fast as they could. The entire forest seemed alive with their own voices echoing around them. By the time they reached their car near the ranger station, the sun was beginning to rise. Both of them collapsed beside the vehicle, exhausted. The old ranger stepped outside. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked quietly. Mark looked at him in shock. "You knew?" The ranger nodded slowly. "That forest copies people, learns how they move, how they talk. Tyler swallowed hard. What happens to the people at Copies? The ranger stared at the dark trees behind them. No one knows. Later that morning, when they drove away from Pine Ridge Forest, two figures stood deep among the trees, watching the road, and both of them looked exactly like Mark and Tyler.